The night before my son's wedding, I stood alone in my kitchen, holding a suit jacket that still smelled faintly of dry cleaner and time. I had pressed it myself that morning, slow and careful, the way you do things when you know you won't get another chance to make them right. The jacket was navy blue. My late wife used to say that color made me look dependable, like someone you can trust, she once told me, smoothing the collar with her fingers while standing on her toes. I hadn't worn a suit like that since her funeral. I laid it gently over the back of a chair, smoothing the sleeves twice even though they were already perfect. Then I poured myself a cup of coffee I didn't intend to drink. The clock on the wall ticked louder than usual, every second landing heavy in my chest. Tomorrow, my only son would stand at the front of a church and promise his life to someone else. And tonight, I had been told, quietly, politely, that my place in that life was finished. It didn't happen in an argument. There was no shouting, no raised voices, no scene anyone else could notice. That's what made it cut so deep. Earlier that evening, I had stopped by the event hall where the rehearsal dinner had just wrapped up. Cars lined the street, headlights flashing, laughter spilling out onto the sidewalk. I wasn't invited to stay long. I knew that. I only came to drop something off, something I had been working on in small pieces, late at night, after long days when my hands ached and my eyes burned. A leather-bound photo album. I'd ordered it online and waited 3 weeks for it to arrive. When it came, I filled it slowly, page by page, memory by memory. Inside were pictures most people had never seen. My son as a baby, asleep on my chest, both of us in a recliner that squeaked every time I shifted my weight. My son at 7, standing beside a rusted bicycle I fixed with borrowed tools, and a YouTube video playing on my phone. My son at 12, holding a report card like it was proof that all the nights I came home exhausted had meant something. My son in his first suit, the day he told me he wanted to be a lawyer. I didn't bring the album to show off. I brought it because I wanted the woman he was marrying to understand where he came from. She met me near the doorway, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. She looked perfect. People always said that about her. Perfect hair, styled just right. Perfect posture. Perfect smile that never quite reached her eyes. She glanced at the album once. Just once. Then she leaned in, close enough that I could smell her perfume, and said something so quietly I almost thought I imagined it. After tomorrow, she whispered, you're not really part of this family anymore. For a moment, my mind stalled. Not because I didn't hear her, but because nothing in my life had prepared me for someone to say that so calmly. I blinked. I think I even smiled out of habit, like I'd misheard a joke. She must have noticed a confusion on my face, because she tilted her head slightly and smiled again, smaller this time, sharper. You did your job, she continued, her voice still even. You raised him. That chapter's done now. I stood there holding that album like it weighed 100 pounds. She straightened her posture and smoothed the front of her dress, already finished with me. It would probably be best if you didn't make things awkward tomorrow, she added. Big emotions tend to distract people. Then she turned and walked back toward her friends, laughter rising up around her like nothing at all had happened. No one noticed me standing there. No one asked why my hands were shaking. I don't remember walking back to my car. I don't remember the drive home. What I remember is sitting at my kitchen table hours later, the album closed in front of me, my palms resting on top of it, like I was afraid it might disappear. I had raised my son alone for 32 years. When his mother passed, he was barely 6. People brought casserole for a while. They brought sympathy. They brought advice I never asked for, but they didn't stay. I stayed. I worked nights driving a city bus, learned the rhythm of empty streets and tired faces. I learned how to stretch a paycheck until it almost tore. I learned how to smile when my son asked why other kids had things we didn't. I learned how to sit in silence when he cried for his mama. And I learned how to be both parents without ever asking for credit. So when that woman told me I was no longer part of the family, it wasn't anger I felt first. It was exhaustion, the kind that settles into your bones after decades of holding things together with nothing but willpower and quiet prayers. I opened the album and turned one page. There he was again, my boy at 12 missing 2 teeth, holding a report card like it was a winning lottery ticket. "You see this, Dad?" he'd said back then. "All A's." I whispered into quiet kitchen. "I see you, son." But tomorrow, I wasn't sure he would see me. My phone buzzed sometime after midnight. A message from him. "Can't believe it's finally here. Big day tomorrow, Dad. I'll see you at the church." I stared at the screen for a long time. If you ever felt quietly pushed aside after giving someone your whole life, you'll understand what that moment felt like. There are moments when stepping forward costs you your dignity, and moments when stepping back costs you everything else. I didn't reply. The next morning, I woke before the sun, not because I needed to, but because my body had learned to rise early over the years. I showered, shaved carefully, laid the suit out on the bed. For a few minutes, I stood there looking at it like it belonged to another man. The church bells began ringing across the neighborhood around 10. I was still sitting at my kitchen table. By 11, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. My sister, my son, numbers I didn't recognize. I turned the phone face down and folded my hands together. I wasn't being dramatic. I wasn't trying to punish anyone. I was simply honoring the boundary that had already been drawn for me. If I wasn't part of the family anymore, then I wouldn't pretend to be. At noon, the phone rang again. This time, I answered, and that's when I learned something I never expected. The wedding wasn't happening. When I answered the phone, I didn't say hello right away. I just listened to the sound on the other end, the shallow breathing, the silence stretched too thin. "Dad?" My sister's voice finally broke through. It didn't sound like her. It sounded smaller, unsteady. "Are you sitting down?" I looked at the chair across from me, the one my son used to pull out with his foot when he was younger, never bothering to lift it properly. I lowered myself into it slowly, as if the movement itself required permission. "I'm sitting," I said. The clock on the wall clicked forward. Noon exactly. The same time the ceremony was supposed to begin. It's not happening," she said. For a moment, her words didn't mean anything. They were just sounds, empty syllables floating in the space between us. "What's not happening?" I asked. "The wedding," she whispered. "They've stopped everything." I felt my chest tighten, not with relief, not with satisfaction, but with something closer to disbelief. I hadn't stayed home expecting consequences. I hadn't imagined the world bending itself around my absence. I thought the day would move on without me. "What do you mean they stopped it?" I asked. There was movement on her end, voices in the background, confusion spilling through the line like static. "Something happened," she said. "No one saying out loud yet, but Daniel found out something right before the ceremony." I closed my eyes. I didn't ask what. I didn't ask how. Because deep down, something in me already knew. After we hung up, I sat there longer than I should have, the phone still in my hand, the screen dark now. Outside, a car passed slowly. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked. Life continued in its usual, careless way. I wasn't there to see the guests filing into the church. I wasn't there to see the flowers arranged so carefully the night before. I wasn't there to see my son standing in his suit looking toward the doors. And yet, somehow, I felt the weight of it all pressing in on me anyway. The phone rang again. This time it was my son. I stared at his name until it blurred. When I finally answered, he didn't speak right away either. I could hear his breathing. Fast. Shallow. Like he'd been running. "Dad," he said finally. I waited. "I couldn't do it," he said. His voice cracked on the last word, like something inside him had split open. I pressed my palm flat against the table, grounding myself in the familiar texture of worn wood. You don't have to explain, I said quietly. No, he insisted. I do. I should have called you earlier. I should have listened. There was a pause. I imagined him standing somewhere unfamiliar, maybe a side room, maybe outside the church doors, the noise of disappointed guests echoing behind him. I found out who she really is, he said. I didn't ask for details. I didn't need them. I had already heard enough in whispers and glances over the past few years. This wasn't a surprise. It was a confirmation. She told people you were overbearing, he continued, that you tried to control me, that you didn't want me to be happy. The words landed softly, but they carried weight, heavy weight. I exhaled slowly. People say things when they're afraid. I said, I know that now, he said. I didn't before. Another pause, longer this time. I went looking for you this morning, he admitted. When you weren't there, I thought maybe you were sick. I said nothing. And then, he continued, everything started coming apart. He didn't tell me how. He didn't need to. Whatever truth had surfaced, it had been strong enough to stop a wedding mid-step, strong enough to silence a room full of people dressed for celebration. That kind of truth doesn't whisper. It waits. Then it speaks when you're least prepared. If you've ever watched someone you love walk straight toward a mistake and felt powerless to stop them, you know what that moment feels like. I could hear him swallowing on the other end of the line. I'm sorry, he said, for not seeing it sooner, for letting her talk about you the way she did. I closed my eyes again. The kitchen felt suddenly smaller. You didn't let anyone do anything, I said. You're grown. You had to learn in your own time. He didn't respond right away. When he did, his voice was quieter. She told me you didn't want to be part of our future. That stung more than I expected. I never said that. I replied, I just knew when I wasn't welcome. The line went silent. After we hung up, I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel relieved. I felt tired. The kind of tired that settles deep, not in the muscles, but somewhere behind the eyes. By mid-afternoon, the messages started coming in. Relatives, old friends, people I hadn't spoken to in years. Are you okay? What happened at the wedding? Is it true you didn't show up? I didn't answer any of them. I made myself a sandwich I barely touched. I walked to the window and watched the neighborhood shift back into its usual rhythm. Kids riding bikes. A couple unloading groceries. Life, again, moving forward without waiting for anyone to catch up. That evening, my sister came by. She stood in the doorway for a moment before stepping inside, like she wasn't sure what she'd find. She looked at me the way people look at someone they think has been hurt beyond repair. You should have been there, she said softly. I nodded. I know. But, she added after a moment, if you had been, maybe none of this would have come out. I didn't respond. That wasn't for me to decide. She sat across from me and exhaled. People are talking, she said. Some are saying you caused all this by not showing up. I almost smiled at that. Almost. They always need someone. I said, might as well be me. She reached across the table and touched my hand. You don't deserve that. I didn't do this for what I deserve. I replied, I did it for what I could live with. She nodded slowly, like she understood more than she wanted to admit. That night, after she left, I pulled the album back out from under the bed. I flipped through it carefully, lingering on pages I'd memorized over the years. I stopped on one photo in particular. My son at 16, sitting on the hood of the old car I'd saved 2 years to buy. He was smiling like he owned the world. I remember what he'd said that day. One day, I'm going to make you proud. I whispered into the quiet room. You already did. If the story is touching something familiar in you, if you ever felt quietly blamed for a choice you didn't make, stay with me, because the day didn't end there. And what followed wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic, but it changed everything. That night, sleep didn't come easy. Not because my mind was racing, but because it felt strangely quiet, like something had finally stopped fighting inside me. I lay on my back, staring at the ceiling fan as it turned slowly, counting rotations the way I used to count bus stops on my night routes. Somewhere between midnight and morning, I realized something uncomfortable. For the first time in years, no one was asking anything of me. No emergencies. No expectations. No one needed me to hold things together. It felt wrong. I got up before sunrise and made coffee again, the same way I always did. The kitchen looked unchanged, but I felt like I was standing in it as a different man. The suit still lay untouched on the bed. I didn't move it. I left it right where it was, like a chapter that had already closed. By 8, my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't family. It was a number I didn't recognize. I let it ring once, twice. Then I answered. "Mr. Carter?" A woman's voice asked. "Yes. This is Denise from Channel 7 News. We're calling about yesterday's wedding." I closed my eyes. "I'm not interested," I said. "I understand," she replied quickly. "But your name is being mentioned, and I wanted to give you a chance to respond before we air anything." There it was, the other side of the story, already forming without me. "I didn't cancel any wedding," I said calmly. "I stayed home." There was a pause. I imagined her scribbling notes. "So you deny influencing your son's decision?" "I didn't influence anything," I said. "I wasn't there." She thanked me politely and hung up. I sat there for a long time after that, staring at the dark screen of my phone. By noon, the internet had already decided who I was. My sister sent me screenshots I didn't ask for. Father abandons son on wedding day. Controlling parent pushes fiancé away. Wedding drama exposes family rift. They didn't show my face. They didn't need to. My absence was enough for people to fill in the blanks. I thought about saying something, posting a statement, correcting the record. But then I remembered something my wife used to tell me back when we were still young and everything felt temporary. People who rush to explain usually end up explaining forever. So I stayed quiet. That afternoon, my son came by. I heard his car pull up outside and felt my chest tighten before I even saw him. When he knocked, he did it softly, like he wasn't sure he still had the right. I opened the door. He looked older than he had the day before. Not in years, but in weight, like something had settled onto his shoulders that hadn't been there before. He stepped inside without speaking. We stood there for a moment, neither of us knowing what to do with our hands. "I didn't know where else to go," he finally said. "You came home," I replied. He nodded, eyes fixed on the floor. "I didn't protect you," he said. "I should have." I shook my head. "That was never your job." He sat at the kitchen table, the same chair he'd pulled out with his foot as a kid. "Some habits never leave you. They're saying you manipulated me," he said quietly, "that you tried to sabotage the wedding." I poured him a glass of water and slid it across the table. "People say things when they need a villain." He looked up at me then. "Did she really say what she said to you?" "Yes." "When?" "The night before." He closed his eyes like the answer physically hurt. "She told me you were overbearing, that you didn't want to move on." I exhaled slowly. "I wanted you happy. I just didn't want to disappear." He nodded once, hard. "I see it now." We sat there in silence, the kind that doesn't ask to be filled. After a while, he stood and walked toward the hallway. He stopped at the bedroom door, staring at the suit laid out on the bed. "You pressed it already?" he said. "I always do things early," I replied. "I'm sorry," he said again. This time, it sounded different. Not rushed, not defensive, just honest. He left shortly after that, saying he needed time to think. I didn't stop him. Some lessons don't stick if you cling too tightly. Later that evening, the messages changed tone. Where earlier they'd been accusing, now they were curious. Is it true the bride was involved with someone else? Did Daniel find something out? People are saying there was more going on. The truth, once disturbed, doesn't stay buried for long. Still, I said nothing. If you've ever been blamed for something you didn't do, you know how tempting it is to fight back, to prove your innocence loud enough for everyone to hear. But I had lived long enough to know something else. Truth doesn't need volume. It needs time. The next morning, a man knocked on my door. He introduced himself as a lawyer representing my son. "I just need to ask you a few questions," he said. I stepped aside and let him in. He asked about my relationship with the bride, about conversations, about whether I'd advise my son against marriage. I answered honestly, simply, without emotion. At the end, he closed his notebook and looked at me for a long moment. "You didn't do anything wrong," he said finally. "I know," I replied. When he left, I sat back down at the kitchen table and folded my hands. For decades, I had carried responsibility like a second spine, held it upright even when it bent me forward. Now, for the first time, I wasn't carrying anything at all. That afternoon, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was my sister. "They're turning on her," she said quietly. I didn't ask who they were. She posted something online. My sister continued, trying to explain, trying to cry her way out of it. I closed my eyes. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt sadness. For her, for my son, for what might have been if truth hadn't waited until the last moment. "She mentioned you again," my sister added, "said you were jealous, that you couldn't let go." I smiled faintly. People say things when they're losing. That night, I sat on the porch with a glass of water and watched the streetlights flicker on one by one. Neighbors passed, some nodding politely, some pretending not to see me. I didn't mind either way. For years, I had worried about being forgotten. Now I understood something better. Being erased by the wrong people is sometimes a kind of freedom. If this story feels familiar, if you've ever been quietly blamed while the truth took its time, stay with me, because silence doesn't end stories. It just gives them room to unfold. The next few days moved differently, slower but heavier, like the air itself had thickened. Every morning, I woke up at the same time out of habit. Even though there was nowhere I needed to be, I made coffee the same way I always had, stood at the counter instead of sitting down, and stared out the window as if something might finally make sense if I looked long enough. It didn't. By the third day, the story had taken on a life of its own. I could feel it without opening my phone. Neighbors paused longer than usual when they passed my house. Conversations stopped when I stepped onto the porch. Some people nodded with sympathy. Others looked away, uncomfortable. I wasn't angry at them. People don't like uncertainty. They like clean stories, heroes and villains, right and wrong neatly labeled, and silence makes people nervous. That afternoon, my son came back. This time, he didn't knock. He used his key, the same one I'd given him when he first left for college. I heard the door open and close. The familiar sound grounded me more than I expected. He stood in the doorway, his tie loose and jacket missing. He looked like a man who hadn't slept much. "I talked to her parents," he said. I nodded once, waiting. "They called me," he continued. "Said we needed to clear the air. And I asked." He exhaled sharply and sat down. "They said you poisoned me against her, that you planted doubts, that if you'd just known your place, none of this would have happened." I let the words settle. "They didn't surprise me. They said you were afraid of being alone," he added, "that you couldn't handle me starting my own family." I looked at him carefully. "Do you believe that?" He shook his head. "No, but they believe it. Or at least they want others to." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "They're threatening legal action. Against you. Against me. Saying you interfered." I felt something tighten in my chest, not fear, but recognition. When people lose control of the story, they reach for authority. "Did you tell them anything?" I asked. "I told them to stop," he said. I told him the truth. I nodded again. That's all you can do. He looked up at me, frustration flickering across his face. That doesn't feel like enough. I studied him for a moment. I saw the boy he used to be, the man he was becoming, and the space in between where most people stumble. It rarely does, I said. He stayed for dinner that night. We ate quietly, no television, no phones. Just the sound of forks against plates, an occasional sigh. It reminded me of earlier years, when money was tight and conversation was optional. After he left, I sat alone again. That night, I finally opened my phone. I didn't scroll. I didn't read comments. I searched one thing, her name. The first thing that came up was a post she'd made herself. A photo of her in a simple black dress, eyes red, face carefully lit. The caption was long, carefully written, just emotional enough. She spoke about betrayal, about heartbreak, about being blindsided by a man who couldn't let go of his son. She didn't name me. She didn't have to. I closed the app. I didn't feel the urge to defend myself. I didn't feel the need to explain. Instead, I felt something colder settle in. Clarity. I had spent most of my life trying to keep things from falling apart, holding people together, absorbing damage quietly so others wouldn't have to. But this wasn't something I could fix by staying silent forever. Still, I waited. If you've lived long enough, you learn when to speak and when to let the truth walk on its own. The next morning, a letter arrived. Official, heavy paper, legal language. I didn't open it right away. I made my coffee first, sat down, then I read it slowly. They were accusing me of interference, of emotional manipulation, of causing financial loss. I folded the letter and set it aside. Later that day, my son called. They sent me one too, he said. Same accusations. I could hear the weight in his voice. He was new to this kind of pressure. I wasn't. Listen to me, I said. They're not doing this because they're right. They're doing it because they're scared. He was quiet. They thought this marriage was security. I continued. Now it's gone, and they need someone to blame. That night, I called someone I hadn't spoken to in years. A woman I used to drive home after late shifts when her car broke down. She'd gone on to work in financial investigations. Back then, she told me, half joking, that numbers never lie. People do. She remembered me when I told her what was happening. She didn't interrupt. Send me whatever you have, she said finally. I don't have much, I replied. That's fine, she said. I know where to look. I hung up feeling something unfamiliar. Not anger, not revenge, preparation. Over the next few days, I stayed quiet. I didn't respond to messages. I didn't answer calls I didn't recognize. I let people say what they needed to say. And slowly, the tone began to shift. Whispers replaced accusations. People started asking different questions. Why would her family push so hard? Why the legal threats? What are they trying to protect? The truth doesn't need a megaphone. It just needs a crack. One evening, my son stopped by again. He looked calmer this time, steadier. They're nervous, he said. I can tell. So can I replied. He hesitated, then asked, why didn't you fight back sooner? I thought about that. Because I want to be sure, I said. Sure of the truth. Sure of myself. And sure that when it came out, it wouldn't need me shouting beside it. He nodded slowly. We sat together on the porch that night, watching the sky fade from blue to black. For the first time since the wedding day, the air felt lighter. If you've ever been painted as the problem while knowing you weren't, stay with me, because the truth was done waiting. And soon, it wouldn't need my silence anymore. The first thing I learned when you stop reacting is how uncomfortable it makes other people. By the end of that week, silence had done more damage to her story than any argument ever could. People started asking questions, not out loud, not publicly, but quietly. The kind of questions that don't need answers right away. Just time. I noticed it in small ways. A neighbor who'd avoided eye contact earlier that week now nodded when he passed my house. A woman from church left a note in my mailbox instead of texting. My phone buzzed with messages that didn't accuse anymore. They asked, "Are you okay? This doesn't feel like the whole story. I hope you're holding up." I didn't reply to most of them. I had learned something over the years. When people are truly listening, you don't have to speak loudly or at all. That Friday afternoon, my son came over again. He didn't look rushed this time. No clenched jaw, no pacing. He sat across from me at the kitchen table like he used to after school, elbows resting on the wood, hands folded. "She called me," he said. I nodded once. I figured she would. "She said she wanted closure," he continued. "Said everything got blown out of proportion. And I asked." He let out a dry laugh. "She said you misunderstood her, that you were emotional, that she never meant what she said." I didn't react. "Then she asked if I'd be willing to make a public statement," he added, "to help calm things down." "To help who?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. He didn't need to. "She said people would listen to me," he said finally, "that I could fix this." I leaned back in my chair. Fixing things is easy when you don't have to tell the truth. He nodded slowly. That's what I told her. He looked at me then, searching my face like he used to when he was younger, when he wanted to know the right thing but wasn't sure how to ask. "I didn't agree to anything," he said. "I told her I needed time." "You don't owe her anything," I replied. He exhaled. "I know. I hate that it came to this." "So do I said. "But some endings are necessary." After he left, I sat alone with my thoughts. I thought about all the times I'd stepped in to smooth things over for him, all the apologies I'd made on his behalf when he was younger, all the messes I'd cleaned quietly so he could walk forward without looking back. This time, I wasn't cleaning anything. That evening, my phone buzzed with a message from the woman I called earlier in the week, the investigator. I found something. It read, "We should talk." We met the next morning at a small diner off the highway, the kind of place where coffee cups never stayed empty and nobody paid attention to anyone else's business. She slid a folder across the table without ceremony. "Your instincts were right," she said. "This wasn't about love." I didn't open the folder yet. I just wrapped my hands around the warm mug in front of me. "Her family's been in financial trouble for years," she continued. "Multiple bankruptcies, lawsuits, assets moved around to avoid creditors." I opened the folder slowly. Documents, dates, names. "This engagement," she said, tapping one page, "was supposed to stabilize things. Your son's future income, his career trajectory. That's what they were counting on." I closed the folder. I didn't feel angry. I felt tired. "So what happens now?" I asked. "That depends," she replied. "Do you want the truth out, or do you want peace?" I thought about that. "I want the truth," I said, "but I don't want to shout." She smiled faintly. "Good, because you won't have to." Over the next few days, things moved quietly. No announcements, no social media posts. Just information changing hands, slowly and carefully. And then something shifted. The narrative changed, not suddenly, but noticeably. A post disappeared. A comment thread was locked. A story was edited. People started noticing the gaps. That Sunday, I went to church for the first time since the wedding. I sat in the back pew like I always did. No one approached me. No one avoided me either. The sermon was about truth, how it doesn't rush, how it doesn't need defending. I almost smiled. After the service, someone touched my arm. It was a woman I'd known for years. We'd exchanged polite hellos, nothing more. "I'm sorry," she said simply. "For what?" I asked. "For believing what was easiest." I nodded. "We all do sometimes." That afternoon, my son came by again. "They're backing off," he said. "Her parents." The threat stopped. I looked at him. That's good. They know, he added, about the finances, about what was planned. I stayed quiet. She asked to see you, he said. I raised an eyebrow. Did she? She said she wants to explain. To apologize. I thought about that for a long moment. No, I said gently. She's already explained herself. He didn't push. He just nodded. That night, I sat on the porch again, the same spot I'd been sitting all week. The streetlights flickered on one by one. The neighborhood settled into its usual rhythm. For years, I'd been afraid of being pushed aside, of becoming invisible. But sitting there, feeling the quiet settle around me, I realized something else. Being overlooked by people who don't respect you is not a loss. It's a release. If this story feels close to home, if you've ever been blamed while holding your ground, stay with me, because the truth was no longer hiding, and the people who thought silence meant weakness were about to understand just how wrong they were. There's a moment when a lie starts to collapse, where the people who told it stop speaking and start watching instead. That's where things were now. I could feel it in the pauses between phone calls, and the way conversations ended abruptly when my name came up. The noise had faded, replaced by something quieter. Suspicion, doubt, the kind that doesn't announce itself, but lingers. I didn't celebrate it. I went about my days the same way I always had. Grocery store on Tuesday mornings. Gas station coffee that tasted burnt but familiar. Evening walks down the block when the sun dipped low enough to soften the heat. But even in those ordinary moments, I noticed a shift. The cashier who used to avoid eye contact now asked how I was doing. The neighbor who once crossed the street now slowed down, unsure whether to stop. People weren't convinced yet, but they were listening. That's all truth ever needs. One afternoon, a letter arrived addressed to my son. He brought it over unopened. I don't want to read it alone, he said. We sat at the table together. He opened it carefully, unfolding the pages like they might cut him if he moved too fast. His shoulders sagged as he read. They're withdrawing a legal threat, he said quietly. No apology, just backing away. I nodded once. They want a non-disclosure agreement, he added. They don't want this going any further. I looked at him. And what do you want? He didn't answer immediately. He stared at the paper, then folded it slowly. I want the truth, he said. Not revenge, not money, just the truth. I placed my hand over his. Then don't sign anything that asks you to lie. He nodded. I won't. That evening, my phone rang again. An unfamiliar number. I answered. Mr. Carter. A man's voice said, smooth and practiced. This is Richard Hayes. I recognized the name immediately. I'm calling because we need to put an end to this, he continued. Things have gotten out of hand. I said nothing. You've had your say, he added. You've made your point. There's no need to keep dragging this out. Still, I stayed silent. Finally, he cleared his throat. We're prepared to make this right. Privately, I leaned back in my chair. There's nothing private about the truth, I said. He paused. Are you threatening us? No, I replied calmly. I'm declining to protect you. The line went quiet. Then he hung up. I sat there for a long time after that, staring at the wall. My heart wasn't racing. My hands weren't shaking. I felt steady. That surprised me. For years, I'd associated confrontation with fear. Raised voices, consequences, loss. But this wasn't confrontation. This was clarity. The next morning, my son sent me a message. Something's happening. I didn't reply right away. I waited until he came by later that afternoon. They're turning on each other, he said as soon as he stepped inside. Her parents, her friends, everyone's trying to distance themselves. I nodded. That's what happens when the story stops protecting you. He paced the room, restless. She reached out again, he said. This time she sounded scared. And I asked. She said people were asking questions she couldn't answer. about money, about timing. I poured us both a glass of water and set them down. Truth has a way of arriving late, I said, but it always collects interest. He sat down heavily. I keep thinking about what she said to you. I looked at him. About you not being part of the family, he continued. About being done with your role. I shrugged lightly. She told me who she was. I just listened. He shook his head slowly. I didn't. We sat there quietly, the sound of the clock ticking between us. He finally spoke again. I thought letting go meant leaving you behind, he said. I didn't realize it meant standing beside you. I felt something tighten in my chest. Not pain, something warmer. That realization came at cost. I said gently, but you learned it. Later that week, the story broke publicly. Not with headlines screaming my name, not with interviews or statements. Just facts. Documents surfaced. Timelines didn't line up. Financial connections came into focus. The tone shifted overnight. The same people who'd rushed to defend her now asked careful questions. The same posts that painted her as a victim quietly disappeared. No one apologized publicly. They didn't need to. Silence told the story better than words ever could. That Sunday, my son and I walked into church together. Not the front pew, not the back. Somewhere in the middle. I felt eyes on us as we sat down, but they weren't hostile anymore. They were curious, respectful. After the service, someone approached us. Then another. No one asked for details. They didn't need them. On the drive home, my son was quiet. Finally, he said, I used to think strength meant speaking up. I glanced at him. Sometimes it does. And sometimes, he asked. Sometimes, I said, it means knowing when not to. That night, as I sat alone on the porch once more, I thought about the words she'd whispered me days before the wedding. You're not part of this family anymore. She'd been wrong. Family isn't something someone grants you. It's something you build, protect, stand beside. If you've ever been told you were expendable after giving everything you had, stay with me. Because when truth finally settles in, it doesn't arrive with noise. It arrives with certainty. And certainty changes everything. The first night after the truth began settling, I slept deeper than I had in weeks. Not because everything was resolved, but because nothing inside me was fighting anymore. The kind of sleep that comes when you stop bracing yourself for impact. When you finally accept that whatever is coming next will come whether you tense up or not. In the morning, I woke to sunlight cutting across the kitchen floor. Dust floated in the air, slow and quiet. I stood there for a moment longer than usual, letting my feet rest against the cool tile, listening to the house breathe. For years, this place had been loud with responsibility. Now it felt steady. I made coffee and sat at the table, without turning on the radio. I didn't need noise anymore. Silence had stopped feeling empty. It felt earned. My phone buzzed just after 9. It was my son. I'm outside, he said. Can I come in? You don't have to ask, I replied. He came in carrying 2 paper bags from the diner down the road. The one we used to go to when he was a kid, when payday lined up just right, and I could afford pancakes instead of oatmeal. I remembered you liked their biscuits, he said, setting the bag down. I smiled faintly. I do. We ate quietly. No phones. No distractions. Just the sound of food wrappers and the scrape of chairs against the floor. After a while, he leaned back and sighed. I didn't realize how much I had let her define the story, he said. I didn't interrupt. She was always so sure, he continued, about everything, about what was right, about who mattered. I thought confidence meant clarity. I looked at him. Sometimes confidence is just fear wearing good shoes. He nodded slowly. She called again, he said. I waited. She didn't apologize, he added. Not really. She said she was misunderstood, that her parents pressured her, that she was trying to protect herself. I didn't respond right away. When I did, my voice was even. People tell the truth in pieces when they don't want to face it whole. He studied me for a moment. She asked if we could talk. All three of us. I raised an eyebrow. Did she? She said it might help everyone move on. I folded my napkin and set aside. And what do you think? He hesitated. I think she wants control back. I nodded once. That's usually what apologies sound like when they come too late. He exhaled. I told her no. Something shifted then. Not dramatically. Just enough. After breakfast, he helped me take out the trash. Something small. Ordinary. But it felt different. He wasn't helping out of obligation anymore. He was just there. Later that afternoon, a car pulled up across the street and parked longer than necessary. I noticed it because it didn't belong. A woman stepped out, dressed neatly, hair pulled back tight, purpose in every movement. I recognized her immediately. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment, looking at my house like she was deciding whether or not to cross a line. Then she did. When she knocked, it wasn't hard, just firm enough to be heard. I opened the door. She looked thinner than she had weeks ago, tired in a way makeup couldn't hide. Her eyes flicked past me into the house, like she was searching for something she'd lost. "May I come in?" she asked. I didn't step aside. "What do you want?" I asked calmly. She swallowed. "I just want to talk." "I've already heard you," I replied. Her mouth tightened. "You heard me once. That doesn't define everything." I held her gaze. It defined enough. She shifted her weight, frustration creeping through the polish. "You don't understand the pressure I was under." "I understand pressure," I said. "I lived with it for decades without using it as an excuse." She flinched. "I didn't mean it the way you took it," she said quickly. "About you not being part of the family." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't lower it either. "You meant it exactly the way you said it." I replied. "You just didn't expect me to listen." For a moment, she said nothing. Then she sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly. "Daniel's different now," she said. "He won't even speak to me." I nodded. "That's his choice." "You've turned him against me," she snapped suddenly, the mask cracking just enough to show what was underneath. I felt no anger, only confirmation. "I didn't turn him anywhere," I said. I stepped out of the way. She stared at me, her expression flickering between anger and something close to fear. "This didn't have to go this far," she said. I met her eyes. "You took it there." She looked past me again, like she expected my son to appear and rescue her from the conversation. He didn't. After a long moment, she straightened her posture and smoothed her jacket. "I hope you're happy," she said coldly. I paused before answering. "Happiness isn't what this is," I said. "This is peace." She turned and walked back down the steps without another word. I closed the door gently. That evening, my son came over again. I didn't tell him she'd stop by. He didn't need that wait. We sat on the porch as the sky darkened, the air warm and still. "I don't hate her," he said suddenly, "but I don't trust her anymore either." "That's not cruelty," I said. "That's clarity." He nodded. "I keep thinking about what she said, about roles being done." I looked at him. Roles don't expire when they're built on love. He smiled faintly. "You never stopped being my father." I swallowed. We sat there until the streetlights came on. If you're listening to this and you've ever been told your time was up after giving your whole life to someone else, stay with me. Because the quiet moments after truth comes out are where the real story lives. And sometimes the strongest thing you can do is remain exactly where you are, unmoved. After she came to my door, the house felt different. Not heavier, not lighter either. Just settled, like dust after a long drive on an unpaved road, finally drifting back to where it belonged. I didn't replay the conversation in my head the way I might have years ago. I didn't imagine sharper replies or stronger words. I said what needed to be said. And more importantly, I didn't say what didn't. That night, I slept with the windows open. The hum of the neighborhood floated in, distant cars, a laugh down the street. Someone's radio playing a song I half remembered from another life. It reminded me that the world was bigger than one wedding, one lie, one woman's ambition. In the morning, my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't family. It wasn't friends. It was someone from church. Mr. Carter, the message read, "I hope you'll mind me reaching out. I wanted to apologize." I stared at the screen longer than necessary. For believing what was convenient, the message continued. For not asking questions. For assuming silence meant guilt. I didn't reply right away. Apologies are strange things. They arrive late, often after the damage has already reshaped you. Still, I appreciated the effort. It told me something important. The story had changed. Later that afternoon, I went for a walk. Not for exercise, not to clear my head, just because my legs wanted movement. The sun sat high, warm but not harsh. A couple of neighbors waved. One stopped to chat about nothing in particular. Weather, traffic, the price of groceries. Normal things. That's how I knew things were returning to balance. When I got back home, there was an envelope waiting in the mailbox. Plain, no return address. Inside was a short note. "I'm sorry for what I said. I was wrong. I see that now." No signature. I folded the note and placed it in the kitchen drawer, not because it meant everything, but because it meant something. That evening, my son came by later than usual. He looked tired but calmer, like someone who'd stopped carrying a load he didn't realize was crushing him. "They're asking questions at work," he said as we sat down. "Nothing bad, just curiosity." I nodded. That's how it starts. "They asked if I was okay," he added, "if everything was settled. And I told them I was learning," he said, "not rushing." I smiled faintly. "That's wise." He leaned back and stared at the ceiling. I keep thinking about how close I came to making a permanent decision based on temporary blindness. I looked at him. Most people do. The lucky ones catch it in time. He was quiet for a while. Then he said, "I don't think I want to rush into anything again." "That's not fear," I said. "That's experience." We ate dinner together that night. Simple food. Nothing fancy. The kind we used to eat when it was just the two of us and payday felt far away. Afterward, he helped wash dishes. We stood side by side at the sink, hands moving automatically, like we'd done 100 times before. I realized then that we weren't repairing something broken. We were reinforcing something intact. Later that week, the calls stopped. No more journalists. No more legal letters. No more whispered warnings. Her name faded from conversations. Not erased, just reduced to what it had always been. Irrelevant to our future. One afternoon, my sister called. "You know," she said, "people are saying you handled this with a lot of grace." I chuckled softly. Grace is just patience wearing good manners. She laughed. Still, not everyone could have done it. "I wasn't trying to be admired," I said. "I was trying to survive myself." She paused. "Your son's lucky." "I know," I replied. "So am I." That night, I sat alone on the porch again. Same chair, same view, but something had shifted inside me. The fear of being replaced, of being left behind, had loosened its grip. I realized I'd been measuring my worth by my usefulness. How much I provided, how much I sacrificed, how little trouble I caused. But love isn't transaction, and family isn't a position you lose. If you're listening to this and you've ever felt like your value expired the moment someone younger stepped in, stay with me, because the truth is simpler than that. You don't age out of love. You don't retire from belonging. And you don't disappear just because someone else wishes you would. Near the end of the week, my son stopped by one last time before heading back to his place. He stood by the door, keys in hand, hesitating. "I was thinking," he said, "about the album." I felt my chest tighten slightly. "What about it?" "I'd like to see it," he said. "When you're ready." I nodded. "Soon." He smiled. "Take your time." After he left, I went to the bedroom and slid the album out from under the bed. I didn't open it yet. I just held it for a moment, feeling its weight. Some things don't need to be rushed. As the night settled in, I turned off the porch light and sat in the dark, listening to the quiet, not the lonely kind, the earned kind. And for the first time since the wedding day, I felt something I hadn't expected to feel so soon. Not victory, not revenge, peace. The album stayed on my nightstand for 2 days before I opened it, not because I was afraid of what was inside, but because some memories deserve a steady hand. I wanted to meet them without flinching, without rushing past the parts that still carried weight. On the third morning, I sat at the kitchen table, sunlight spilling across the wood, and turned the first page. There he was, my son at 3, missing one sock, holding a toy truck like it was treasure. His mother stood just behind him in the photo, smiling wide, unaware that time was already counting down. I traced the edge of the picture with my finger and felt the familiar ache rise and settle. I didn't stop it. Grief doesn't disappear just because you survived it. I turned another page, another year, another version of us. Each image told the same story in different ways. 2 people doing their best with what they had, even when what they had wasn't much. When I reached the middle of the album, my phone buzzed. It was my son. "I'm nearby," he said. "Is now okay?" "It is," I replied. He arrived quietly, like he didn't want to interrupt something important. When he saw the album open on the table, he stopped short. "You found it," he said. "I always knew where it was." I replied. He pulled out the chair across from me and sat down slowly. We didn't speak for a moment. He just looked. "That picture," he said finally, pointing. "I remember that day. You cried because you didn't want to wear shoes," I said. He laughed softly. "I was stubborn." "You still are," I replied, and he smiled. We turned the pages together. Sometimes he told stories I'd forgotten. Sometimes I filled in gaps he'd never known about. The album became less about the past and more about what we both carried quietly for years. Halfway through, he stopped. "I didn't know you skipped that promotion," he said. I shrugged. "It would have meant more hours. Less time. You never told me. I didn't need to." He nodded, eyes lingering on the photo. "She used to say you held me back." I closed the album gently. "I held you up." He looked at me then, really looked at me. "I see that now." We sat there in silence again, the kind that doesn't ask for anything. Later that day, something unexpected happened. A reporter showed up at my door. I recognized him from television. He introduced himself politely, held his notebook close to his chest like a shield. "I know you've declined interviews," he said. "I just wanted to ask one question." I waited. "Do you feel vindicated?" he asked. I thought about it. Vindication is loud. It demands witnesses. It feeds on recognition. That's not the word I'd use. I said, "What would you use?" he pressed. I met his eyes. Resolved. He wrote it down. Thanked me. Left. That evening my son called. "That article went up," he said. "It's different this time." I didn't need to ask how. "They didn't quote you much," he added. "They focused on documents, facts, patterns." "That's enough," I said. The calls that followed were different too. People didn't want statements. They wanted understanding. They wanted reassurance that doing the quiet thing didn't mean losing. One message stood out. I stayed silent when my daughter-in-law pushed me out. I thought it meant I failed. Listening to you, I think maybe I didn't. I stared at that message for a long time. If you're listening and wondering whether silence means weakness, I want you to hear this part clearly. Silence is not surrender. It's selection. It's choosing not to waste energy where truth will arrive on its own. A few days later, my son invited me over to his place for dinner. The first time since everything happened. His apartment looked the same, but he moved through it differently, slower, more deliberate. "I'm not rushing anymore," he said as we ate. "I'm paying attention." "That's how you avoid mistakes," I replied. "You listen when things don't feel right." He nodded. "I should have listened sooner." "You listen when it mattered," I said. After dinner, we sat on his couch and talked about nothing important. Sports, traffic, old memories that didn't hurt anymore. Before I left, he walked me to the door. "I'm glad you stayed home that day," he said quietly. I paused. "I didn't stay home to teach anyone a lesson." "I know," he replied. "That's why it worked." Driving back, I realized something else. The story wasn't ending with her. It wasn't ending with blame. It was ending with clarity. That night, I stood at my window and looked out at the street. Same houses, same lights, same quiet. But inside me, something had finally settled into place. I wasn't afraid of being erased anymore, because the people who mattered saw me clearly now. If this story has stayed with you, if you've ever questioned your worth after being pushed aside, stay with me just a little longer, because there's one last thing I learned, and it matters more than all the rest. The last thing I learned didn't come all at once. It arrived slowly, in pieces, the way understanding usually does when it's meant to stay. It came a morning I woke up without checking my phone first. The afternoon I realized I had replayed her words in my head even once. The evening I caught myself humming while washing dishes, without knowing why. For a long time, I measured peace by the absence of conflict. If no one was upset, if nothing was falling apart, I told myself things were fine. But that wasn't peace. That was endurance. Peace, I learned, is what shows up when you no longer feel the need to explain yourself to people who already decided who you were. A week after my son and I went through the album together, he called and asked if I wanted to take a drive. "Anywhere specific?" I asked. "No," he said. "Just out." We drove without talking much at first. Past streets I used to travel on my bus route years ago. Past the park where I'd taught him to ride a bike. Past places that had held entire versions of our lives that no longer existed. At a red light, he looked over at me. "I used to think family meant starting something new," he said. "Now I realize it also means protecting what already exists." I nodded. Most people don't learn that until it's tested. He exhaled slowly. "I'm glad you didn't fight her. I don't think I would have seen the truth if you had." I kept my eyes on the road. Sometimes resistance strengthens the wrong thing. We stopped at a small diner and ate quietly. No rush, no agenda, just time spent without tension. On the way back, he said something that stayed with me. "I don't need to rush into a future to prove I have one." That was when I knew he'd changed, not because he was hurt, but because he was thinking clearly. That evening, after he dropped me off, I sat on the porch again. Same chair, same street, same soft hum of life moving forward. But I wasn't waiting anymore. I thought about the fear I'd carried for years, the fear of becoming invisible, of being replaced, of being politely thanked for my service and quietly removed from the picture. That fear had kept me small in ways I hadn't noticed. It made me accept dismissals I shouldn't have, made me tolerate disrespect because I didn't want to be alone, made me confuse being needed with being loved. But that fear lost its power the moment I stayed home. Not because the wedding collapsed, not because the truth came out, but because I chose dignity over desperation. No one teaches you that lesson. You learn it when you're tired of shrinking. A few days later, I received a message from someone I didn't know, a woman about my age. "I listened to your story," she wrote. "I was told I was no longer necessary after my grandchildren were born. I thought staying quiet meant losing. Now I think it meant surviving." I read that message twice. Then I replied, "You didn't lose. You held your ground." That's when it clicked. This wasn't just my story. It was a familiar one. People like us, the ones who carried families through storms, who built foundations others walked on, We're often told our usefulness expires once the heavy lifting is done. We're expected to step aside quietly, be grateful, be small. But there's a difference between stepping aside and being pushed out. One is choice. The other is erasure. And when you choose to step aside on your own terms, something powerful happens. You're no longer begging to be included. You're deciding who deserves access to you. The last time I heard about her was through someone else. Not gossip, just information. She'd moved back in with her parents. The image she'd built had fractured. People had stopped defending her. I didn't feel satisfaction hearing that. I felt distance. She was no longer part of my thinking, and that was a real ending. A few weeks later, my son invited me to a small gathering. Nothing formal, just friends. No speeches, no expectations. As we stood talking near the window, he leaned over and said, "I want you to know something." I looked at him. "You didn't lose me," he said. "You saved me." I swallowed and nodded. That night, when I returned home, I placed the album back on the shelf. Not on the bed this time, but where it belonged. Visible, accessible, unhidden. Some stories don't need to be protected anymore. Before going inside, I stood on the porch a moment longer, listening to the quiet, not the lonely kind, the settled kind. If you're listening to this and you've ever felt like your role was finished just because someone else wanted the spotlight, remember this. You don't age out of relevance. You don't retire from love. And you don't lose your place just because someone else tries to take it. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stay home, stay silent, stay grounded, and let the truth walk forward without you dragging it. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to sit with it. And if you know someone who's been quietly pushed aside after giving everything they had, share this with them. They might need the reminder. I know I did. Thank you for listening. Goodbye.